You're listening to Sox in the Basement, a production of the Broadcast Basement Limited, where every show is 30 minutes of good and comes from a basement bar on the south side of Chicago. Pull up a stool, pour a cold one, and join us right now for Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always at soxinthebasement.com. And belly on up to the 9-foot homemade oak bar and pour yourself a cold one. My name is Chris Lanuti. I'm back after a very nice weekend. We're doing a draft show on Sox in the Basement, the MLB Draft happening this weekend. Ed will be along in just a little bit. Gonna get to the guest first, kind of lay the groundwork. I'll be laying the groundwork at Cork and Kerry at the park on Saturday because my good friend Craig Toth from Bucks in the Basement is coming in for Pirates White Sox. And where else would I take him except for the place for pregame, postgame, in-game, Cork and Kerry at the park. In the shadow of the ballpark at 33rd and Princeton, he's going to get an award-winning burger, ballpark favorites. I'm going to show him the big, beautiful bar, the incredible staff, the indoor-outdoor seating. We're going to come back after the game. We're going to party it up. Perfect place for you, though, to bring the family out, get them fed before you head into the ball game. See everything they have going on at corkandkerry.com. Big event there being planned for Cubs Sox in August. I'm going to have more details for you, lay it all out, but after we do a draft show, because this is going to be fun. We're not going to do your typical draft show. We're going to talk about who's making the choices. We're going to talk about how long it's going to take for any of these players to make an impact. We're going to talk about guys drafted recently and who's getting here next. Without further ado, joining me on the phone line right now, I'm sure he's been very busy this entire time period as we run up to the draft. Like, this is what he does, and I cannot pass up the opportunity to bring in James Fox of FutureSox, our good friend, as the White Sox prepare to probably screw up yet another pick a guy that's going to be really, really hyped and then not turn out to be anything. You see how negative I am, James? I'm a negative guy. How are you?
Well, it's because you've been watching like too many big league White Sox games. You're like poisoning yourself.
I'm tired of your prospects and your draft, but I got to do this because it's coming up. So we got to talk about it. Before we get into what you think the Sox are going to do, and I also want to talk about a couple of guys that you've been following in the system and what you think of them right now. Why is it so quiet with the trade deadline at this point? And is the draft the reason for that?
It is, but it's also like you pay a premium this early. So I brought this up on our show with Ian. Do you remember last year's Aroldis Chapman trade by any chance?
No. Last year seems eons ago when Pedro Grifol was your manager.
That's true. So Aroldis Chapman was, believe it or not, on the Royals last year. I don't know if you remember this. And he was traded to Texas in like June. I know you're a fantasy baseball guy. The return for Aroldis Chapman, like in late June, was lefty Cole Reagans, who is now like one of the best pitchers on Kansas City. So I think one reason is teams like don't feel like paying the premium, right? So I guarantee like teams are talking. But when you call, like the price is higher than it should be because it's early. But the other thing that you just said, like, yeah, the draft is really late. So it's, Sunday, so July 14th, 15th, 16th over All-Star Weekend, front offices are really focused on the draft. And everybody has a scouting director who kind of leads things. But I mean, like those higher guys in baseball ops, like a lot of GMs are involved, a lot of assistant GMs are involved, a lot of directors of player personnel are involved. So like trade activity is really not going to pick up until after the draft. And it's been like this the last 3 years. And it's kind of strange because you have your baseball reporters and radio guys and stuff that like keep talking about trade rumors and like, specifically with the Cubs, right? If you listen to a lot of local radio, it's like, oh, the Cubs need to do something. Jed Hoyer has to do something. And it's like, guys, like there's nothing for Jed Hoyer to do. Like they're screwed. I know this is a White Sox podcast. I won't go long, but it's like, what would you like them to do right now? Like basically no trades are going to happen until the end of the month. And these teams that are in a similar spot, like might be buried by then. But that's just kind of the system that's been created by moving the draft so far back.
As we get ready for this draft, I'm curious who you think is going to make the decisions. I think we've talked in years past with the last regime that Kenny and Rick were really making the choice at one. And as the draft went on, they didn't even care. Like somebody be like, we think it's this guy. All right, cool. How do you think this works in a Chris Getz front office?
I think it's totally the opposite. Now, here's the thing, right? Like, he has influence. Like, if you want to take a first baseman at 5 and Chris Getz is like, look, my first pick ever can't be a first baseman. Like, I could see that sort of thing. But, I mean, I think he trusts the scouting director. Something funny that I feel like a lot of people don't know, Mike Shirley, he's had 4 picks now. So he's taken Garrett Crochet, who's awesome, who leads the 2020 draft in WAR right now. And then he also drafted Colson Montgomery and Noah Schultz, who look like we've all been hyped over prospects before. They haven't done anything yet, but they're both playing in the futures game. And then last year, a little bit questionable Jacob Gonzalez. But kind of like you said, there was all sorts of rumors about others meddling in the draft process. When Mike Shirley was an area scout scouting the Midwest, he drafted Chris Getz. So Chris Getz trusts Mike Shirley. So my guess is this is Mike Shirley's ball game. But also, one thing we've talked about is just Chris Getz is in charge, right? There's no Kenny. He's Kenny and Rick now. So if this is bad or good or whatever, we know who to blame and who to praise, which I kind of like. So to me, you have an amateur scouting department, they're going to make a recommendation. My guess is Chris Getz goes with their recommendation at 5. And then after 5, it's generally the scouts making picks anyway, kind of like you referenced.
So you mentioned the idea that Chris Getz can't take a first baseman. I will venture to guess that's because people like me will be screaming, we don't need any more guys like that. I love players that play shortstop because shortstops, the best player on the field generally. It's like that in Little League. It's like that in high school. It's like that in college most of the time. That's the guy who, when he gets drafted, eventually, if he doesn't work out at short, moves to center field or second base or third base and has versatility because he's an athlete. And if he can hit and he can play that position, he's going to find his way to the major leagues. That's what I want. Are we in danger of them ending up with a first baseman?
Yeah, so danger might be the wrong word. I mean, so Jack Caglione from Florida is a two-way sensation out of Florida, big time left-handed power. So he's 6'5", 230. He's one of the most popular players in college baseball. He's not going to pitch as a professional. But I mean, it's big, massive power. I mean, if he's on the board at 5 and they took him, I wouldn't be totally stunned. He came in and visited, but I mean, most of your draft analysts kind of think he's going to be gone and not even be an option for the White Sox. So yeah, I think that would be the only chance there, right? And look, I mean, Jack Caglione could come in and be one of his comps is Pete Alonso. They went to the same high school, but I mean, Pete Alonso was a 2nd round pick. So I mean, look, if he's Pete Alonso, nobody's going to care. But the problem is if you don't hit, right, you're seeing it right now with Andrew Vaughn. There's absolutely no utility because you're playing first base. If you're playing first base, you have to mash. What you just said, you take a shortstop that can't stay at shortstop. Well, he can play second, he can play third, he might play left, he might play right. That's why for me, it's always up the middle guys, especially that high.
Is there a guy like that out there? Is it a prep guy? Is it a college guy? Who do you think they're taking at 5?
Yeah, so I think the two most likely, J.J. Weatherholt of West Virginia was the number 1 player in the class coming into the season. He's a little bit scary because he's had 2 hamstring injuries.
Oh my goodness. No.
Yes, exactly.
No.
So,
If you've ever pulled up lame in a game ever, I don't want you on this team.
I know. So he actually might go number 1 to Cleveland, but that's a middle infielder. And then the guy who I think is the overwhelming favorite for their pick right now, and if you look at anything, you look at Chuck Garfien saying it now, I'm sure Scott Merkin will write it because this is what's out there, right? But this is kind of what scares me 5 days out, because this is the guy who I would prefer, but it seems like it's the guy who everybody thinks they're going to get. So that kind of scares me is Connor Griffin. He's an 18-year-old out of Mississippi. He reclassified into this class. So he's young for the class. He plays center field and shortstop. He's 6'4", 205, big time power, big time speed. He can play really good defense at both spots. The only question with this kid is that some scouts really don't like his swing. But he's talked about it. He went on with Jim Callis. He said, look, whatever a team wants me to do is fine. A lot of teams don't want to take a guy that you have to change the swing right away. I don't know that you have to change the swing. It's just a little bit long. So I think people are afraid that he won't reach his ceiling. But look, the White Sox take Connor Griffin. It's another thing that people don't really know right now. Rookie ball ends sooner this year. It ends in a week. So any high school guy that you take, we're probably not going to see anywhere this year. They'll be in Arizona hanging out at the facility, working with White Sox coaches, playing backfield games. You're not going to see them in games until next season. because there's nowhere for these guys to play, and you're not going to send them to low A as an 18-year-old, like right out of the gate. So, you know, I like taking the upside chance because, look, if Connor Griffin's hit tool gets better, you're talking about a superstar face of the franchise type kid, right? When I'm picking at 5, I'm doing that over taking a safe college guy, even if it means that, like, you might miss on the pick ultimately.
Talking with James Fox of FutureSox, talking about the upcoming draft, talking about guys who may be here soon, guys that may be delayed a little bit. That's next. You may be thinking about mom and dad, grandma and grandpa, and keeping them out of assisted living, making plans to switch to a new age of life. Make it so they can get around on their own and live independently. Hyatt Home Medical Equipment has stair lifts, ramps, grab bars, lift chairs, even bathroom remodeling. Hyatt works with insurance and has 0% financing for qualified individuals. Are you unhappy with your CPAP vendor? Use one of those CPAP machines when you're sleeping? Switch to Hyatt Home Medical Equipment. Get supplies directly mailed to you. They also have the latest and greatest in continuous glucose monitors. Hyatt Home Medical Equipment. Learn more about them at hhme.com. Colson Montgomery was a prep guy. I mean, he was drafted back in 21, and he's only 22 years old right now. He looks like he's stalled in AAA, though. I made a mention on my last show that I'm like, well, he ain't getting here this year. And this may impact how the team's looking at its system, how they're looking at their future. Am I wrong to say that things have gone terribly awry with Colson Montgomery?
Yeah, he's not playing very well. I mean, it's the first time he's struggled. Like, AAA it's a different animal just because you have you don't have better pitching, but you have like more veteran pitching. So he's still walking a lot. You know, one of the things that's a little bit scary is just like the amount of like good fastballs that he's like missed in the zone. He's hit a lot of mistakes. And I mean, even with like all of his struggles, he's like a 92 WRC plus guy in AAA. So I mean, look, like he's not terrible. He's just like not doing what a top 15 prospect in baseball should do. But I mean, at this point, like he takes a month and figures it out and has a hot month. Like, I think he's like right back on track. Like, it's not all bad. It's just not what, you know, they thought. And he's been jumped, I think, by Noah Schultz. Noah Schultz is the top prospect in the system. He's maybe the best pitching prospect in all of baseball. So, you know, you have two guys that are both, yeah, but I mean, those are both high school guys. Both high school guys that this current scouting director drafted. So that's why I want them to keep taking high school guys, because it seems like they know what they're doing on this front.
I remember a few years ago that was something you wanted them to start doing, and it looks like it's paying off. So here's the question I have for you. We're always talking about guys that are up at the top of the draft, and I think one of the biggest complaints that Sox fans have is that we never see a guy who gets drafted in the 8th round who becomes something really good. Like, has anything changed under Getz? Has anything changed in the last couple of years? Is there any reason why I should believe that they can do a better job at identifying later round talent that can be turned into something good and then actually develop it?
Yeah, I think the classes have been pretty good. I'm sure you've heard the name Brooks Baldwin. So he was a 12th rounder. Yeah,
tell me about this guy. I was talking about him last week. I was like Brooks Baldwin, this guy's made a lot of jumps in just a few years. What is this?
He's been really good. Just like a really good college player that played everywhere at UNC Wilmington, went to the Cape and was great. And look, all these draft analysts are like, oh yeah, this guy was really good. And then, you know, it's a 12th rounder still, but they paid him like a 7th rounder. And he's done nothing but hit since he got into the White Sox system. One of the reasons why he's in Charlotte right now is because he's a switch hitter and there's no left-handed pitching in the AA Southern League. So him and Edgar Caro are both in Charlotte right now just to basically get more right-handed at bats. I mean, Brooks Baldwin is going to be on the 2025 White Sox. Now, you know, is it a utility guy? Maybe. But, I mean, that's a 12th rounder that you're going to get to the big leagues. Like another guy, Mason Adams, is a right-handed starter, one of their starters from AA. He was a 13th rounder out of, I believe, like Jacksonville. He's been awesome. I mean, he might be a top 10 prospect in the system right now, totally unheralded. Kind of reminds me of like Davis Martin, but has a little bit better stuff. Just kind of like comes out of nowhere, and he's going to be in the rotation soon. And then the one that everybody's talking about right now, obviously, local kid, George Wolko from Downers Grove North. He's an interesting case because he was a 7th rounder last year that the White Sox gave $1 million to. And it was one of these scenarios where like Big George reclassified to last year's draft. He was supposed to be in this year's draft. So he doesn't turn 19 until January. They basically called George Wolkow up in the 7th round last year, and they're like, look, we have $1 million. Do you want to sign? And he signed. And something that happened with him, he really started to develop and learn his body and, like for lack of a better term, like kind of turned into a man a little bit. Like last year after the high school season, like this is a guy who the White Sox might have stolen just because, like, if he played at Downers North this year and looked the way he looks right now, like he's a top 50 pick in this current draft. And they have him in their system. It's a lot of strikeouts. It's too many. It's like a 44% K rate, but a lot of that was in his first couple of weeks at Kannapolis. He has a 174 WRC plus at Kannapolis as an 18-year-old with 10 homers. Like he's going to crack top 100 list. Like he's really, really exciting, but he's always going to be one of these guys that Ks a lot with high BABIPs because he just like hits the crap out of the ball. And like, if you look at any discourse on Twitter right now over George Wolkow, you'll have your dissenters, right, that are like, oh, it's nothing, he Ks too much. And like, yeah, generally, like I'm one of those people, but he's a child, like playing in low A, and he's like as big as Adam Dunn is. So he's really interesting.
All right, so you've mentioned a bunch of names. I'll go through them again for you because I just want to know what you think. You're analyzing the minor leagues for FutureSox. You're looking at the draft. When we talk draft here, it seems obvious, like, yeah, you're picking this talent. It's going to take a while for this talent to get here. So let's talk about the talent that might get here very soon. Between Colson Montgomery, Noah Schultz, Edgar Caro, I'll throw his name out there. The guy that you just mentioned, Mason Adams. Also this Brooks Baldwin. And maybe I've forgotten somebody else. Who am I going to see this year or at least starting on this team to begin 2025? Because as I look at this roster and I look at the idea that Moncada and Jimenez should be bought out because Moncada, while he's a good player, is not worth $25 million a year and Jimenez is done. If you're going to do that, you're going to get some money on the payroll. You might want to add a piece or two, and you've got all this young pitching. Where can I start filling in names, James, of guys that are going to show up and contribute and hopefully be a part of this team either by the end of this year or kicking off 25?
I don't know how many you're going to see this year, but I think all of those guys play the majority of the 2025 season in Chicago. So, I think the plan was to have Colson Montgomery be your shortstop, but with the struggles, like, I don't know. I don't know that you see him. And I do know, like, with the weird new rule where teams get like a first round pick if their prospect wins Rookie of the Year. So you need like to be under 45 days eligible. So if you do see Colson Montgomery this year, it won't be for long. Like it might just be for September. Brian Ramos will be back. We've seen him, obviously. Edgar Caro is probably their catcher for most of next year. I would say your Caro and Lee is your young catching like duo, essentially. And look, like Noah Schultz doesn't have a ton of innings racked up. Like he's probably going to finish the year at like 90 or so, but like he's in Double-A. He's going to debut in Chicago next year. Like if he has 140 innings next year, there's no reason why, a good chunk of those can't be in Chicago. You talked about Mason Adams, like Kai Bush, they acquired with Caro in the Angels trade for Lucas Giolito last year. He's had a really good year. I think he's the next guy that we see. So the next guy is like Kai Bush is a lefty, Mason Adams, and then like Jake Eater was the lefty that came back in the Jake Berger trade. He's got really good stuff, but his numbers have been just decent. But I mean, he's on the 40 man. So look, after the trade deadline happens, we could see any number of these guys this year. And I think like the White Sox fans will be happy with that. It doesn't mean that like the team's going to be much better, but at least we won't be watching these same like retread guys that we know for sure aren't going to be on the next good White Sox team.
You mentioned Brian Ramos. I hate to go back into a guy because everything you just said there was great, but you mentioned him and I think to myself, here's a guy that really wasn't hitting very well, came up out of necessity, looked good for a little bit, and then stopped hitting again. Is he a major league everyday third baseman? Because I always feel like I see his name up towards the top of the list, but I'm not really sure about him. I'm probably more iffy about him than any of the other position players you've talked about.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to be lower, like, on my personal list when we do it after the trade deadline, just because, like, I don't really know what Brian Ramos is, because he doesn't walk a ton, and he has power, but, like, not that much power. And I think people were, like, pretty impressed when he came up, right? But then, like, big league teams adjusted, and then he kind of went back in the tank. He hasn't been great at Charlotte, But I am curious to see, like, all these guys are at Charlotte together now. I'm wondering how much that helps Colson Montgomery, just like he's not the only guy there. Now Caro's there, and Baldwin's there, and Ramos is there with him, which I think is interesting. Yeah, these guys factor in. I mean, I don't know how good Brian Ramos is going to be, but he's going to get some opportunity. I mean, obviously, like, he's not a prospect anymore, but, like, I was really high on Lenyn Sosa, and he came up 3 different times and looked terrible. But, like, Lenyn Sosa was really good in the Double-A Southern League.
He's hitting well in the last month, right? I mean, like, isn't it? Do you believe in the last month from him? Is it finally coming together, or is this fool's gold?
No, I do. I think this is what he is. I mean, he's been like a 115 WRC plus like over the last month. He's not going to walk. He's just not. He's got power. I don't know that he can play third. It's probably second. But I mean, he's good enough to be part of the second base mix on the 2025 White Sox, and then you see what you have. So he's taken a long time at each level. He would go level to level and he would stink and then he'd be really good. And that took even longer in the majors, to the point where, like, I was like, man, maybe I'm wrong. Like, maybe Lenyn Sosa is not very good. Or maybe, like, some of these guys just take a while, you know? And when you're, like, trying to win, there's no opportunity for that. But the White Sox are definitely not trying to win. So these guys should have some opportunity to at least, like, play and fail a little bit.
James Fox from FutureSox always has really good stuff. We're looking at a couple possibilities. Could be a first baseman with an awful lot of power. I like the idea of that prep shortstop. I love the idea.
Connor Griffin of Mississippi. Yeah.
Oh, I love the idea. You're right, though. When everybody's talking about one name, you sit there and go, is that really what's going to happen? But, I mean, I like the idea of just an athletic player that can, you know, go out there and play anywhere. And I'm actually not that turned off by the idea that maybe you adjust something in his swing. I mean, didn't they do that with Jacob Gonzalez? Like, you were one of those people like, I don't know why we drafted this guy. Then he didn't do very well down there. Then it seems like he made an adjustment, and now he's at least serviceably good in the minor leagues. Like, I mean, I don't know what 270 translates to in the majors. It's probably 220. But, I mean, it'd be nice if you had him hitting 270 in the majors, playing second base well, you'd be happy.
Yeah, and Jacob Gonzalez has been good at shortstop. So, like, he's been good defensively. He was a college guy. Like, the swing change is good, but it's taken some of the power. So we'll see. I mean, Jacob Gonzalez started for Team USA at shortstop. So, like, to me, that pick was it just didn't fit what this scouting director does, which is why, like, I just thought that there was, like, some shenanigans in the final year of Ken Williams and Rick Hahn and Jeremy Haber, you know, where, like, that stuff would happen occasionally. It just, like, conflicted with what I'd heard ahead of time and what they'd done previously. So that's the only part that really kind of was annoying about last year's draft. But then, look, they did go back to their ways of, like, Grant Taylor they took in the second round. He was really good. We just talked about George Wolkow. So, you know, the drafts overall, the strategy has been better. Now we just have to see if the players are any good.
James Fox helping us out with our draft preview, which was more of just a state of what's going on in the minor leagues and some guys that are finally starting to do very well. He mentioned Lenyn Sosa, and he talked about his WRC plus, and he talked about the WRC plus of some other players. And it's a great measuring tool as Ed sits down with me to finish off this show. And my friend, I know you know what it is, I know what it is, but every once in a while I feel like I have to explain it. Because that is a stat that not everybody uses.
It's not on the back of the baseball card necessarily to where, you know, you sit there and go, hey, he had, you know, look at the WRC plus on that guy over there.
I mean, like, I love the fallback on OPS because it's such a simple formula. It's slugging and on base percentage. So how often are you getting on base, and are you getting extra base hits? And so I always love that one. It's a really easy one. You can look at OPS plus, which figures out what the league average is. So 100 OPS plus is average. If the guy's got 110, he's better than league average. And You can kind of just really quickly say this guy's good at hitting. WRC plus takes the runs created statistic and adjusts that number to account for ballpark, era that they're playing in. So a WRC plus of 100 is league average. 150 would be 50% better than league average, very similar to the OPS plus. So, but the idea is it takes out like factors like this guy played in a better ballpark to hit in. This guy hit during a live ball era. And so it's a great way to measure ball players in the terms of what are they creating at the plate no matter where they play. So to give an example of guys that have 100, which is the league average, WRC plus, currently on the White Sox, there is only one.
I was going to say, I know it's a short list, but how short it's short? Well, one is better than none.
There is one hitter as of today qualified in the amount of at-bats that he's gotten because he hasn't been injured or something like that, who's playing a good amount of games, as a qualified hitter with a WRC plus of 100, which is league average, and that's Gavin Sheets. Everybody else is below average in WRC plus on this White Sox team. There are 3 guys who have not had enough at-bats. Tommy Pham has only had 236 plate appearances. He would have a 103 WRC plus at this moment. Luis Robert Jr., 159 plate appearances with a WRC plus of 117, and he's down right now. So that is normally much bigger for him. Yoan Moncada over only 44 and 11 games, 121 WRC plus. By the way, he's starting to rehab. I don't think he's going to be well enough to come in and play well enough that they can trade him for a bag of balls, but he's trying, because I don't know what you do with him
good.
after he comes
I
back.
don't know
Once
either.
he comes back, Ed, how often do you play him? Because you're going to play him, I guess. He's going to hang around the team, but you're buying him out. You're not giving him $25 million. We covered that with Fox. They're not doing that for Jimenez and Moncada. And he's a good player, but he's not $25 million. So you're moving on from him. It's such a weird storyline with him. But again, back to the WRC plus thing, that's what it is. If Lenin Sosa is going to keep up what he's done in the last month, he's playing every day next year. That's a ball player, and you're excited about it. Fox doesn't think it's fool's gold. He thinks it's real. This is just his MO. Takes a while to adjust to a level, finally gets it.
Yeah, well, and you can follow his stats and see that's been the case. And you and I have talked about that a few times with him. And he didn't really get a chance last year. I mean, he would come up, and then they would give him these short looks. But if you give him some extended runs, some extended play, give him a chance to develop and play every day, that's going to work out in his favor. And so why not? I mean, he's 24 years old. There's no reason why he can't be part of your future, part of your present. And if he's got positional maneuverability where he could be the second baseman next year, he could be the third baseman next year, that opens it up for some of these guys that are coming up too to be able to fit and move around and mix and match.
And we have some nice players, it sounds like, that are coming up by the end of this year and starting off next year. And again, the pitching just looks incredibly deep and talented. And I don't think they're moving Crochet. I will say that again. I just don't think his value, because of the innings limit, is enough to get what the White Sox value him at. So they may be willing to trade him. And we talked about how the front office, there's a disconnect there, right? I think Tony's telling Bob Nightingale, we're going to have to get rid of this guy because he didn't take the first offer. And Chris Getz, I don't think, wants to move him, nor is he going to sell him low. And so then you look at Luis Robert Jr., the other name that I don't think they should trade. And I think the only one that's really going to make a play at him is going to be the Phillies. Right now, if you look nationally, they're flat out saying it. They're flat out saying that the Phillies front office is telling other teams that they want either Robert Jr., Jazz Chisholm, or Cody Bellinger. And Bellinger may not be available. That hasn't been decided yet. And Chisholm is not in the same ballpark as those other 2 names. Like, he's the fallback. And just, if you don't believe me, we'll do the quick stat. Last year, his OPS plus was 100, league average. This year, it's 103. All right? He's not worth giving up a ton of stuff in your farm to put in center field if you have World Series aspirations when a Luis Robert Jr. is out there. But I think the Phillies don't have enough to go out and get Robert Jr., and that's why I think he also is going to stay. Because I look at their top 10 on MLB Pipeline. 7 of those guys are an A-ball or rookie ball. You're waiting a long time, and there's a lot of question marks. And then you got Andrew Painter as their best prospect, who would definitely have to be included in the deal, and that's great to add to the pitching, but at some point you need players out there. You need guys that can hit. And so I don't think they have what it takes to get Robert Jr., even though I think that's going to be the hype, the Phillies trying to get him in the next couple of weeks.
Well, and that's going to be one of the problems, right? Is again, the Garrett Crochet thing. We think, we agree, you and I, that his value at the deadline here is lower. I think the question with Luis Robert Jr. is, one, how much do teams around the league really trust him because of his health issues and his history of not staying healthy? But I think, too, the question becomes, is there a team that is capable of giving you what you want for him? And I think there are teams that will throw the farm at Chris Getz, literally throw the farm at Chris Getz to try and get Luis Robert Jr. And obviously, if somebody's going to overpay for him, then that's great. You take them up on that 100% of the time. I almost don't care who the player is. If someone is really going to overdo it. But again, prospects are prospects, and you and I have talked about this so many times that it becomes just a question of whether or not you can find some things that are going to be sure things, because we've seen what happened with Chris Sale, for example, where Yoan Moncada and Michael Kopech are sure things coming out of that trade, and now the only thing we're sure of is that we can't wait to get rid of them, to the point where Michael Kopech hires Scott Boras to represent him, and the only thought I had was, it's not going to help you, buddy. It doesn't matter. Where normally we would have been sitting here going, oh God, he's another Boras client. We got to get rid of him. Now we're thinking we got to get rid of him because he's just isn't any good. So I think the question is going to be, if the Phillies, for example, come at you with a bunch of rookies, if they throw Johan Rojas, who is their current center fielder, who's 23 years old and in his rookie year, if they throw him into it, and he was a good player in the minors. I mean, there's a reason why they're giving him an opportunity, but he was a guy that did decently, 277, 751 OPS, from what I understand, pretty good center fielder. So if he's a guy that gets thrown in there off the major league roster, you're still, though,
they don't have enough.
Like you said, you're still looking at it going, it's not enough. There's too many guys that are too low in the system for us to be able to project whether or not they're really going to be able to help. And that's a problem with a team that has made some trades and done some things to hurt their own farm system.
Listen, here's the thing. You see Robert Jr. walk out the door or Garrett Crochet walk out the door. It's either a mind-blowing deal, which I don't think is available. I don't think the teams that want them the most have what it takes to get them. And in Crochet's case, it's going to be, he's not going to pitch that much down the stretch. We can't give you all that. And the White Sox are going to shrug and say, then we'll hold on to him, because you don't need to trade either one of them. But if you do see a move, that's the front office telling you we're years away. We are not as close as the hype machine tells you that we are. These guys that we keep telling you are going to be good, we're not so sure about it. That's how it would feel. I think it's far more likely those two names stay. I laugh every time I see a national poll asking if one or both of them are going to be traded. I think neither of them are being traded, because I just don't think it matches up. It's the fun thing for national pundits to do, to sit there and tell you the White Sox are going to deal this great pitcher who's like a Cy Young candidate, who's going to be playing in the All-Star game. They're going to deal this guy, and he's going to help somebody win a World Series. What a great story. Or Luis Robert Jr., this otherworldly talent who at times has been injured, but he's going to become available. He's going to go someplace else. They're going to have a better training staff. They're actually going to take care of him. He's going to become just the greatest superstar. He's going to help one of our favorite teams win, like the Yankees or the Dodgers or somebody like that. It's a great story for them to tell. I just don't see how it matches up. That doesn't mean that they may not move them in a year when it all works out right. But then by then, you may see a much different White Sox team. And you might be saying, well, then why am I moving on from these guys? I got them locked in for the next few years.
Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement.
Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always on soxinthebasement.com.